I'm building a 2-trailer tiny house, and this is how I built my trailers. Let's go. I started off by mitering the corners of my coaming rails and setting them up in the stands. I squared it all up and then tacked them in place. I set my rails at 600 centres. I used a piece of timber and bar clamps to set even spacings as I worked along the trailer. Once I had them tacked in place, I checked the deck was still square and level before I welded it all together. Because I'm building 2 trailers, I immediately built the second deck. This allowed me to reference the first one for square and level. My chassis rails are a ladder truss design with a heavier gauge rail on the bottom. I set my rails up only supporting the ends. This would create a slight bow up that would straighten out when I welded it to the deck. I did this to pre-tension my rails in the hope that I'd see less sagging when I start building my house on the trailer. Once I had the ends squared up, I went along and tacked the bracing pieces. I used a piece of timber and a bar clamp to set even spacings. I then worked back along the rail, welding all the welds that are perpendicular. I alternated left and right to prevent the welds pulling my ends out of square. I then laid the chassis rail down and did all the welds on the side. I flipped the rail after every weld to keep the heat distribution even and prevent the rail from twisting while I was welding. The drawbar rails are made out of 2 pieces of RHS stitch welded together. I welded the ends together and then worked my way along the rail doing 50mm welds every 300mm. I flipped the rail after every weld to keep the heat distribution even and prevent warping. I pre-made the surrounds for my tail lights. I didn't want the rear of my trailer to look boxy, so I cut the corner off at a 45. I notched 2 22.5 degree notches out of the piece of RHS, folded it up and welded it. Time for assembly. Making all the parts of the trailer in separate components made them much easier to handle and to move around to weld. First off, attaching the chassis rails to the deck of the trailer. I lifted them on and then positioned them, making sure I got them to the right width for my axles. I then got the end structure that I'd previously made, put that into the trailer and welded it on. Moving to the front of the trailer, this structure had to be much stronger, as it's going to transfer the weight of the trailer through to the drawbar. To keep the front tidy, I cut the corners in at 45. I notched out the RHS with a 45-degree angle, then folded it down where it met the trailer. I tacked it in place and then double-checked all of my measurements for my chassis rails. Once I was happy, I welded it all together. To strengthen the chassis rails and prevent lateral movement, I welded in 3 bracing pieces across the bottom of the trailer. The main structure of the trailer is now complete. This part of the trailer is designed to be the foundation for my house. The outer coaming rail should provide a solid perimeter to fix my wall frames to, and the full-length chassis rail should support my house all the way out to the edges, where the majority of the weight is going to be focused down on my trailer via the external walls. To set the drawbar, I marked a reference point along the chassis rails and then ran a centre string line from the rear of the trailer to the front. I put my drawbar rails on the trailer and then set my standout, the distance from the front of the trailer to the tip of my drawbar. I then aligned the drawbar by getting the ends of the rails the same distance from the reference points I marked on the chassis rail and getting my string line to line up with the centre mark that I put on the trailer. Once I was happy with the alignment, I welded the drawbar in place. All welds run parallel to the drawbar rails. No welds are perpendicular as they can weaken the drawbar and very easy crack under load. To strengthen my spring hangers, I welded on 10mm plate steel as the base. I welded the plates on before I put them on the trailer. This allowed me to focus on getting strong welds between the spring hanger and the plate. To prevent the plate from buckling, I only welded the side welds for now. To set my springs, I measured back from the tip of my drawbar to the centre of both springs. I then tacked them in place and measured out from the centre to my front and rear hanger to set them at exactly the same distance. Before I welded them in place, I measured from the tip of the drawbar to the centre of my front and centre hanger to make sure they are exactly the same distance on both sides. Once I was happy, I could weld the plates to the face of the chassis rail and then do the front and rear welds between the hangers and the plates that I hadn't done before. To set the axles, I first bolted them onto the springs using U-bolts. I then measured back from the tip of the drawbar to the front axle on both sides to make sure it's exactly the same distance. Once I'd set the front axle, I set the rear one by measuring from the front to the rear axle to make them parallel. To make my guards, I had some sheet metal bent up into pans with a 30mm break on each side. I I then cut them in around my chassis rail and spring hangers and tack them in place. Because the rear guard hangs so much lower, I also welded up a bracing piece to give it strength. Fill in the area for my lights. I cut out sheet metal at exactly the right size and tacked it in place. This left me with a small gap which I filled with polyurethane and painted over. I prefer this method because it doesn't rust out as I haven't laminated any steel. With the trailer flipped over, I could now do all the welds on top that I couldn't do before. This included welding the plates for the spring hangers onto the chassis rail. I stitched weld the plates to the rail and then filled the gaps in with polyurethane to prevent air and moisture getting between the plate and the chassis rail. I attached my tow hitch by welding plate steel at the apex of my drawbar. I squared the end of my drawbar rails off so I could position the front bolts for my tow hitch into the steel of the drawbar. To attach my chains, I drilled a 20mm hole through plate steel to reinforce the wall of my drawbar that I'd then put a bow shackle through. It's important that the overall thickness was greater than the link size that was required for this trailer. I made swing-away number plate holders because I might want to use underneath the trailers for storage later. I mitered the corners of square tube and then used a piece of board to keep it square while I tacked it in place. I tacked in some sheet metal at the back, then welded on some barrel bolts and then welded to the trailer. To wire up the trailer, I ran everything in 20mm conduit. I ran 4mm 7 core from my plug all the way through to my electric brakes. Then at the junction box, I dropped down to a much lighter gauge 5 core that I run out to my lights. All of my joints are soldered and heat shrink because it's less susceptible to corrosion. I use glue-filled heat shrink to attach the wires to the back of my brakes to prevent moisture getting in. Next time, I'd put draw wires through the frame of my trailer as I was building it so I didn't have to use as much conduit. All that was left to do was to stamp my VIN number onto the trailer and make up my compliance plates. There was too much flex in the steel of the trailer to stamp it directly, so I stamped in some sheet metal and then welded it on. You're not allowed to do this in some states and you have to stamp directly onto the steel of the trailer, but it passed in South Australia. And that's it, the trailer's complete. Got a 4.8 metre by 2.4 metre trailer that's capable of carrying 3.2 tonne. Then, I just need to rinse and repeat. Thanks for watching along. That was heaps to fit into a video, so if you do have any questions, ask them in the comments below and I'll try and answer if I can. Also, I've done another video that goes more into the design of the trailers that I'll link in the description. It's important to note, I'm not an expert in any of these fields. I'm just a dude sharing my own knowledge and my own experience in the hope that I can help someone else along their own journey. Never take what I say verbatim, always balance against your own research. These videos are only intended to help you ask the right questions as you embark on your own project. That said, if you're an actual expert in something that I'm talking about and you see something that could be corrected, don't hate, educate. Comment down below with something that helps inform people. I'll see you again soon.